All right, cool.
Cool, we're recording. So, welcome. My name is Sam Kopak, and you are watching my channel, Parkour Coach Companion. And we're joined with our guest today, who is Tom Taylor, who appears to be in the heavenly realm, but still very much with us. So, welcome, Tom. I'm really excited to talk to you, and mainly because I've been following you for a long time, but we've only really, I think, maybe met once, and that was at World Chase Tag last year, and we didn't really get a chance to talk. So hopefully I can finally get some stuff from you today. And my mission really with this channel is to fill a bit of a gap I feel is in the community, which is coaches communicating with each other. I feel like there's a growing number of coaches, and we're not necessarily communicating in the best way, like ideas to each other. So yeah, I briefly met and saw you at the World Chase Tag, which was a cool event. We didn't get a chance to talk. I believe you've kind of escaped from Italy recently and now back in the UK. But yeah, I think you are high on my hit list because for me, you represent maybe one of the first kind of athletic / performance type coaches within the parkour community, at least from my understanding. I think you've worked with people like Ed Scott, Tim Champion, Joe Hendo, I believe. I wanted to kind of pick your brains on your process and how you think people can improve. Really, that's the kind of goal of this, is to find those gems of like how do we improve as practitioners in parkour. So really my first question to you, and you can go into this in any way you want, is do you think that programming is essentially the path to success and progression in parkour?
I feel like it's an approach that can really be a catalyst for progression in general. Really, I think you're always going to have people that succeed just due to whatever particular advantages that they have when they come into training. So whether they have a psychological advantage, whether they have a physical advantage, for example, if they just generally are stronger or more athletically inclined, if they have particular physiology that lends to the things that we do, even comes down to proprioception. If they have some advantage with regards to better proprioception or something along those lines, or the ability to this ability to kind of picture what they need to do in their heads and then and recreate that with their body. So you have all of these things. There's always going to be people that are able to exceed and perform at the highest level without any structure whatsoever. Well, when you come to speak when you're speaking about general populations, people that aren't that top upper echelon of performance, they're really going to be the people that see the largest amount of benefit from not only structuring their training but planning ahead, and looking, and I feel like I'm a prime example of that. I've competed intermediate level. I've gone to international competitions and I've not come last, which is however that speaks. And I'm not that gifted really. But what I benefited from in the run up to those competitions, and the thing that really bridged the gap for me, when I started doing that, which was probably, I think I went out to NAPC, the North American Parkour Championships, back in, I think the first time was maybe 2016, 2017, and I was on my own. And the thing that separated me from everybody else, I think anyway, or the vast majority of other practitioners that were there at the time, the thing that separated me from them was the fact that I had pretty much year-round periodized training plans that I was performing, I was doing for myself before I started to, give that to other people.
Cool, man. So you run Movementpower, and I had a quick refresh and look on your page and stuff, and And it's interesting that, you know, I see you as an integrated parkour coach, but it doesn't actually say that on your page. Do you help other people outside of parkour as well?
Yeah, so I started off my sort of coaching career, as it were. I was just teaching parkour at a little youth club that was in the city I grew up in Bristol, and I started to get fitness qualifications, started to do personal training, and broad sort of fitness related work, essentially, and within the leisure and fitness industries. So I was a lifeguard, and then I was a personal trainer and fitness instructor, and this all sort of coincided with my development as an athlete at the same time, I guess, which culminated eventually around 2017, 2018, when I started to when I really found I started to gain momentum with regards to coaching parkour athletes specifically, because of the fact that I lived in Exeter. I'd moved to Exeter and I was training with Ed and Tim and Charlie, and those three guys I persuaded to basically just come to my house and train with me in my spare room with my weight set, and that was basically kicked off my business as it was at its peak probably last year. At the moment, there's taking a bit of a break from doing that, but yeah, that's pretty much the journey. So as it stands at the moment, I'm not marketing myself specifically for anything, because I'm behind the scenes. I'm doing a lot of thinking, research, and kind of trying to rethink the way I'm providing the service that I'm providing to people. I'd like to do it with broader populations, just because the sheer sort of that you have like a much wider target market when you're doing general fitness stuff. It's a lot harder to build a client base in that way, because the industry, the fitness industry in general, is so awash with people. Like it's an industry that has had a massive influx of trainers and people that generally don't really have a niche, but who are willing to take on as many clients as possible and deliver broad and generic fitness advice to general populations. And I think with the parkour specific stuff, and if you situate yourself as a parkour coach within the fitness industry, you're in a really good position, because you have that as a niche. So previously I was only marketing myself for, I only want to work with people that are really dedicated and who want to be at this high level of performance. But that whilst I serviced, I helped over 90 parkour athletes, internationally, over the last 3 years, within that. But the way in which I had modeled my business was not sustainable financially. I mean, it's a good side earner. I can make consistent money from it, but not enough where I can do it full time. So this is why I'm having a rethink at the moment and trying to think about ways in which I can market it, potentially use that niche, as a way to build up a more broad client base, and potentially provide some of the aspects of some of the fitness aspects of parkour to them, or use it as a way to denote the fact that I have a better understanding of movement than maybe some other trainer that they might be looking at.
Cool. So so have you in developing these programs, I assume you spent a considerable time kind of researching, and I think that's something that feels like is becoming more and more. I've talked about this with quite a lot of coaches, and that parkour seems to be becoming quite a lot more scientific and quite a lot more athletic. Do you agree with that? And do you think that's kind of like the right way for parkour to go?
I think it has its benefits. It has its advantages and disadvantages, and I think I had always felt that the sport would go this way, and I was literally just waiting for it. Like when I was growing up and I was developing like the training methods I was developing, and basically just arguing with people on the internet about the fact that I thought that weight training and using methodology similar to like American football players and people like that who are in very explosive sports, using similar methodologies would have an advantage. So the whole time, I've been doing that. Sorry. Could you repeat the question again? I'm really sorry. I just fully blanked there.
I was just asking about like how parkour seems to be becoming more athletic.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So obviously during that time I'm waiting. I was sort of waiting because I thought, well, hopefully the competitions will become more open. That will lead to more people trying to get to a higher level of performance, and there's a monetary sort of incentive for them to do so. There's sort of access to a greater audience through that, so it kind of makes the sport more open. But in doing so, it creates this other path that the sport goes in. So you have that traditional path where I feel like it's very much associated with a lot of feelings of duty to other people, of the sort of philosophical roots of the sport, right? So you have this path which is like, kind of, I don't know, everybody got into like the peaceful warrior at some point and all this kind of thing. So everybody was sort of moving in this direction of like kind of a more mindful and philosophically housed way of practicing the sport. And I feel like the competition and higher performance aspect of the sport. So I'm not speaking only about competition, but maybe high levels of performance, with regards to people producing content where they're really pushing the level, really pushing the boundaries of the sport. That is also associated with the prevalence of gyms, the prevalence of classes as well, the prevalence of specific, coaching models and routes for people who are outside of the sport to come into the sport. So the demographics as well have changed over time with regards to who does parkour. In the beginning, I feel like the vast majority of people who did parkour were people from lower incomes. There were people who would have been on the street anyway. All of the people, I mean, it might just be my personal experience, but all of my friends and all the people I first started training with were people that didn't have a lot of money, that were just street kids basically, and that's what I did. I was at the skate park every day, and then someone tried to mug me, so I couldn't go there anymore. So I ended up going somewhere else. You know what I mean? And I was always like, I wanted to be outside, being active, exploring, doing dumb shit, everything. And as I saw classes and gyms slowly gather and gain momentum, and that also coincided with, I feel, was a bit of a downturn for parkour in terms of new practitioners. You ended up with the demographics changing to children of more higher earning parents, people that can afford or have the disposable income to send their children to parkour gyms or to classes, and I feel like those are the people that primarily are going to be the majority of people that are aiming towards competition and maybe separated from the traditional aspect of the sport. I don't think either detracts from the other, really. And I always said this to people that were against competition, is that, well, if competition is done in the right way, and if the sport is taught in the gyms with a with this underpinning of the history of the sport, with this underpinning of the philosophical motivations behind the people that first started the sport, or in some cases the purported philosophical motivations, because I feel like a lot of the guys that may have been in the first or second generations have maybe projected a bit more meaning onto what they were doing than they had at the time. But that's another thing. But I don't necessarily think they work contrary to each other, but I feel like you can see a definite sort of fork in the road for some practitioners and for some populations, for people in specific areas as well. Like, for example, if if you come from Denver, you've got a number of different, or you did have, I'm not sure about now, but you did have a number of different choices in terms of particular gyms that you could go to. You know, if you live in Boulder, Denver area, there's like a number of gyms in that area that, and some people now coming through have never trained outside. They've never gone out and explored, you know, and that's one of the benefits of this whole situation right now, right, with coronavirus. Like, people are having to train on their own. They're having to explore and find spots because they can't just go to their normal spot that might be in the middle of town that's populated, you know. And they also don't want to get caught, you know, if they're spending a lot of time at specific areas. So it's kind of getting those guys that might not have come up with the experiences that, you know, the kind of the people did, you know, maybe 10 years ago, but now they are having that experience. So I mean, it's kind of it may have a positive effect.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just actually I've just come off the back of listening to the Height Drop podcast with Phil Doyle that just came out, and really great. Shouts to those guys. A really good talk with Phil. And I really enjoyed listening to him on Motus as well recently. I feel like it's...
I heard the Motus one.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of long... Well, in some ways, long overdue hearing Phil speak his mind. And I find it so interesting. But one thing they talk about is this exact issue about gyms and how, you know, Phil's saying that for people... Again, I mentioned him before, Daryl Stingley is... Phil says that, you know, incredible athlete, incredible mover, but he's never seen a clip of him train outside. You know, he's kind of stuck at. He seems like a lot of his training is within this gym, and I don't think that detracts from Daryl at all because of his sheer like competence. But like, but it is. But I think you're right, and it is interesting that there are changes into where people are training. And for me, I'm not quite sure about this at the moment, but I feel like to an extent, parkour is almost becoming more about the movement and less about the obstacle. I don't know whether that's a little bit outlandish or like slightly far.
No,
I think that you know, and Phil makes a good point about Red Bull Out of Motion changing the whole thing. Because now people are kind of creating, you know, lines. They're creating these movement.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's less about the exploration of like, oh, I've just found this dirty alleyway, and I wonder if I could get from there to there. Like which is more about the obstacle. I don't know what your thoughts on that, but yeah.
Yeah. So I had a really interesting discussion with Charlie. Actually, I'm quite close with Charlie Havill, and you know his whole history with joining Storm and then leaving Storm, and the kind of, I was very close to him around that time where he was really confused about what he wanted to do, and he had a lot of misgivings about the sport, about the intentions behind the people that are doing the sport. Not to say that I'm not in any sort of particular camp or anything. I'm friends with everyone, so it's not. And I think the politics of certain situations aside, you know, if people have different outlooks on how they want to perform within the sport, and they have different approaches to the sport, then for sure you definitely need to go your own way. You definitely need to figure out what's going to make you happy, and you know. Not put yourself in a position where you are obligated to do some things that you're not comfortable with or whatever, right? So, but that being said, we had this very long discussion because we were speaking about, so you know Josh Dohy from he was originally from somewhere in Canada. Sorry, Canada. But yeah, so comparing his style of movement, which is what I would probably classify as a very, it's a more aesthetics based sort of artistic approach to parkour. You have you know, like in painting where they say you have to learn the rules to then break the rules. You know, I feel like, you know, so you have this the way the style in which, say for example, Ed and Tim train. They both have different styles, right? Tim's very much challenge focused. Tim's very much always pushing. Well, the vast majority of the time he's pushing parkour movements. He's pushing the kind of, I don't know how you would say the kind of underpinning movements for the kind of the basics of the sport. He's pushing those to the furthest degree you can push them. Whereas Ed is stylistic. He's adding in difficult movements in an entirely different way, right? But their intention is the same. Their intention is to do the hardest thing that they can find, and to continue to progress. That's their intention, right? Whereas the intention behind Josh Dohy's practice, whilst he has some intention to continually progress, I feel like his aim is actually to create something that's novel and is an expression of you know, something that's coming from him. Of course, every action you do, every behavior, every action you do is an expression of something within you, right? Because everything is couched in consciousness, essentially, right? But the intention behind the two are very different. And although it's a matter of aesthetics, because I think even the most utilitarian of practitioners really is only looking at what looks useful. They don't care what actually is useful. They're because if you like if you're a utilitarian practitioner, like I feel like if you were truly utilitarian, you would not be training parkour in the way you'd be doing rage frubeling, bruv. You'd be doing like what Tay was doing like back in the day, right? So there's an aesthetic behind the utilitarian approach even, which is the aesthetics of function, what might look functional but not necessarily is. Same goes for the fitness industry in general, unfortunately. But that aside, so you have these different intentions that are coming through at the moment, and I think Charlie fell into that other one where he's like, look, I'm doing this because it feels nice and I enjoy doing it, and this is my intention, is, you know, to do something that looks interesting but that feels nice and looks nice, and he's not necessarily chasing after the next hardest thing that he can do. He's just comfortably expanding his abilities, and expressing himself in the way he's comfortable doing, rather than looking to really push things, monetize what he's doing, anything along those lines. He's searching for meaning elsewhere, but obviously he wants to be happy in what he's doing within the sport. Yeah, I think you know, some of those some like the rise of competitions certainly has changed how the sport is practiced, for sure. I don't know if it's really made the other way of practicing, you know, disappear. It's not as though people don't practice in that way. It's just it certainly is less compelling to watch sometimes, because I remember days when I started training in Bristol, like 2006. I started in 2004, but like our community built up to about 2006, and there's these videos, and the videos, I mean, they're shit. They're not good videos, but they are the culmination of us going out and having an awesome day, just walking around the city, finding different things to do in that way, right? And not thinking about even thinking about the quality of our movement. We weren't thinking about that because this was before tech was a thing, right? And I think the challenge of coaches now is trying to instill all of these aspects of the sport in their students, and trying to give them a broad education, and not to say that one thing is better than the other, because the sport, people like to project a moral imperative on the things that they do, because they like to think that specific things are potentially more meaningful than they actually are, or you know, whatever. And I always used to say, like, all these people that would say, you know, oh, parkour is about service to other people, or parkour is about this, parkour is about that. And I would say, well, I've met some absolute dickheads who are very good at the sport, so I don't see how that, like, you can equate the two, because there are all these different routes, and the great thing about parkour is the fact that we haven't been prescribed a specific route to go down. You know, we've not been it's not been a prescriptive thing, and that's the great thing about the sport.
There's a lot there's a lot in there. There's a lot to hang on. Yeah,
sorry.
There's a lot in there. It's really interesting, and yeah, it's interesting you mentioned kind of things like about this way of the peaceful warrior type philosophy, and I think things like that I think the scene has changed a lot. And it's interesting, I rewatched a bit of Pedro Thomas, you know, Pedro Thomas from Brazil. I rewatched some of his videos from like 9 years ago, yesterday, and forgotten completely that he was actually pretty innovative in some of his more creative aspects. I always loved his like rail sticks. They were like absolutely pucker, but like at the same time, he's definitely in some ways nearer the pinnacle is the wrong word, but he's near the pinnacle of this like this kind of samurai type figure, you know, like this parkour mystic. Interesting that, I mean, I'd absolutely love to talk to him properly, because I think he really would would give some interesting thoughts on this. But it's interesting, like even back in the day, he was doing these things. I want to press him on where his mind was at with these sort of things, and what his idea of progression is. Do you think it's funny as well, because I actually completely forgot until recently that Jaden Sampets and Yanis Shower were actually kind of being adopted into Storm. I actually completely forgot. That would have, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs fully. I'm quite a big parkour nerd, but I don't know everything. But I find it crazy that what would have happened, you know, if those guys had moved forward with Storm. But yeah, I spoke to Charlie very, very briefly for the first time at the after the chase there, I think, and I felt that that frustration in him, that kind of helplessness of trying to project yourself as a competent mover, and actually then derobing yourself of the happiness that you get from training in some ways.
Yeah, I think it comes from you know, if you put yourself in a position where you actually achieve something that you've kind of dreamed of, but then it turns out to be something, it turns out not to be serving you in the way that you thought it would, and also like emotionally speaking, and also it changes the fundamental way in which you practice, or it changes the dynamic of your relationship to the sport, you know, which I feel happened with him. One thing I would say about so using Daryl as an example of somebody who you know, has very different approach to the sport than maybe some of the initial practitioners might have. I don't think that's necessarily true in terms of his intentions, because if you look at if you dive into his, you know, lore, as it were, the way he creates his art, the way he creates his videos, everything about his character is about projecting this idea that he has taken from comic books about serving other people by becoming this hero and sort of embodying the ideals that he wants to see in the world, right? Now, he's had an incredible opportunity. That gym that he trains in is probably one of the best. Well, it is the best gym I've ever trained in. It's incredible there. The guy that put it together is you know, he's he's on point. Like if he made every gym, like the game would be different. But unfortunately, you know, he's just. I mean, they're doing very well anyway. I think he would resent, you know, the idea that he only trains indoors, because he definitely trains outside, but he trains very differently. I don't know about his history really. Like I don't know very much about him before. Then before I met him, I think the first time I went out to NAPC. And I didn't really know anything about him before then. But obviously his competency just, you know, made him stand out a mile, and I think he did very well in that competition. So, yeah, So even though his practice in terms of where it is occurring is different than, you know, what you might have originally had, I think the intention behind it's fairly similar to that philosophical kind of approach to practicing the sport. But of course, he's not exploring, and, you know, not necessarily as much as we would have done in the beginning, because we didn't have gyms to go to.
Yeah.
So he's obviously not going to be going around and exploring. But what really speaks to me is the technical progression of the sport and the physical progression of the athletes. And for me, that's what gets me most excited. Like, I really care about philosophy. I really care about ethics, and I read a lot of, like, it's even taken me to studying history and economics and politics and different things. But I resent the application of kind of a very low resolution philosophy just projected onto the sport, seeming, you know, from these very mystical utterings from, you know, the first kind of generation of practitioners. And I feel like, you know, have you read any of the any philosophy, like yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you know, it's yeah, man, it's really interesting how, you know, because we have advanced forward in history, we now have the actual opportunity to look back. I mean, before we I didn't know how to spell parkour, so I didn't know how to put it on, you know, I didn't know how to type it in Google properly, you know, like, and I was just gleaning as much as I could from wherever it was. And I kind of, you know, I started in like 2008, so a few years after you. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely lapped everything up. I lapped in the whole I guess mission and philosophy of these original guys, and it kind of, I guess it became very powerful, because then it linked with what I was seeing in the UK with people like Danny. And
Yes.
Danny for me is maybe this is a big statement, but I'd say without even meeting the guy, is probably one of the most inspiring people that I've ever come across, because with the way my mind was at that time, he was saying these quite, I mean, you could argue mystical things, and I know he's very religious as well. And I took it as gospel, you know. I thought that that we were really, really onto something new and something incredibly, like, powerful that the human body had not really tried before. And so it's interesting now that we can kind of start to pick apart these things. I know that Parkour Generations has come under, should we say, heavy fire for a lot of years, and you know, things like UF that was talked about by Kieran, and yeah, it's so interesting. It's so interesting that something like parkour can start with these ideas, and really, because it's not had a dictator, and because the internet has literally, like, infused into the spine of parkour, it's very unpredictable, and we're moving in a lot of different directions, I guess.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to I make it sound like I'm completely dispelling the idea of thinking deeper about why you like. I'd like to think that I've given a balanced sort of overview of you know, the different sort of intentions and the different amounts of meaning injected into what people are doing. For me personally, I started out, I was diehard sort of. I had my period of time where I was really following everything the Yamak were doing, and just diving into even the history of the Pompiers and David's dad and his history and Method Naturelle and Georges Hébert and all of that kind of stuff. I've got the Être fort pour être utile on my arm. Like I did that when I was 9. I did that when I was 19. Like you know, I was all about duty. You know, the be strong to be useful. Like the idea of serving other people with your physical body. You know, like kind of building yourself up to help others. But the development of my particular, I don't know, philosophical standpoint, my ethical standpoint, my politics in general, took me to a place where now I don't believe in. I can't reconcile myself with the idea of obligation that just arises out of existence. Like I don't believe in obligation that you haven't assumed yourself. So I don't have a duty to other people unless I don't believe so anyway. I don't have a duty to other people unless I really promise that duty to other people, you know, and on an individual level. I don't really like the idea of like a social contract and that sort of thing. However, that being said, of course, I value things like liberty and community and kindness and serving other people, but not underpinned by this idea of obligation to other people. I think obligation must be chosen. I think, and so this utilitarian philosophy that underpinned a lot of the initial practitioners, David's perspective as well, in particular, and everything associated with his practice. I came to see that actually was in opposition to my particular outlook on life, which is very individualist, voluntarist, sort of a kind of liberty-based standpoint, and yeah, I had to contend with that. I had to wrestle with that, and my particular perspective on my practice in the sport changed, in such a vast way. So yeah, it's I'm not against there being meaning injected into what you're doing, and I hope I've not sounded like that, but I am sort of the trope and cliche of of the old school kind of approach to it. Some of the aspects of that I can't really get on board with anymore.
Cool. So we're rattling through. This is there's a lot of stuff in there, and again, I know you're very political, and it'd be great to talk to you about that more.
Oh man, this lockdown is I'm doing my head in. I need to get off Facebook because, boy.
Yeah, man. But yeah, we'll talk. We'll kind of go more into your journey a bit more now, I guess. So what, forgive me, how old are you now? Are you
30?
30. So you're on the old school guy. 2004. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And I guess you're in quite a small. You're actually in quite a small. I guess you could say strata of people there, because there weren't many people training in 2004. So I was gonna ask you a little bit about how your own practice has been, and kind of what your goals or aims are for the future, that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So, of course, when I started, I literally saw a news piece on some local, like BBC Points West, which is like the local news thing for the Southwest, and there was a youth group in Keynsham, which is quite near Bristol, it was like a Christian youth group as well, which is interesting given the history of parkour and how it progressed, and you know its flirtation with some of the sort of evangelist movement. But that being said, anyway, I saw this news piece about these kids, and they were just doing wall runs. They were literally just doing like little tic tacs and stuff around Castle Park in Bristol and around Keynsham, and I was like, what the hell is that? And then I started trying to do a bit, then jump. But the thing is, I like my friends wouldn't do it with me. Then Jump London came out. May have been it may have aired again. I don't know when it aired, but I remember I watched it with my parents, my mum and my stepdad, and my mum like turned to me and said, "I hope you're not going to try this afterwards." and I was like, I probably am, actually, to be fair.
Yeah.
And then I think initially it was like, you know, you had to teach yourself. And then I got a bit older. So yeah, there was this whole period of time where I was like training at night on my own, or with like a small group of friends, or after school, or you know, during lunch breaks. And all we really thought parkour was like doing Kong vaults and doing wall runs and getting on roofs. Like that's all we knew it to be really at the time. Then got a bit older, started going into the city centre, started meeting up with more people, and around 2006, 2007, 2008, there was this huge steep incline in terms of the amount of people practicing. And the level just climbed and climbed and climbed. And I learned to front flip, and I learned to do a bunch of other stuff as things progressed. I then had a really bad bail that took me out of the sport for about 4 months because I scorpioned on a front flip and really jacked up my back for a while. And then I just didn't do flips. I became one of these anti-flip guys. It's just because I was scared of flips. But I'd be like, no, it's not parkour, man. You know what I mean? It's just because I couldn't fucking do it.
In that camp somewhat as well, yeah.
But then, so the group of people that I came up with we were all really just about the architecture in Bristol kind of leads to this, is just doing big jumps and not really caring about like big running jumps, big plyos, big standing prees. There's not really, at the time we didn't really know of any rail spots.
Right.
So for a significant portion of the time I was training, I didn't train rails. Like I didn't train rails until 2013, pretty much.
Well,
yeah. So I was just doing like big fat plyos, big standing prees, and you know, when I started lifting as well, I got stronger, so I was able to do even bigger standing prees and plyos. I got to the point at one stage where I didn't really train running prees, and I didn't train sticking or bounce backs, so I could pretty much standing jump or plyo further than I could running jump, just due to confidence and due to ability.
Mm.
I moved to a Maidstone in the southeast, like 2013. Worst time of my life. Maidstone is an absolute shithole. I'm sorry to anybody that loves Maidstone, but I hated it. Well, it was because I was poor as well. I was really struggling for money. But I would go out every day and just train on rails because that was the only spots that were there. Like there didn't really seem to be any other in the spots. And then I think that's when I started to become more aware of technique, cleaning things up, being more consistent, being more well-rounded. And then following that, I think it was very, like I've always been very slow at progressing. I've never been like the flash in the pan guy or the guy to really, I've always been very consistent, very able to put together runs that are very seem very, very consistent, not particularly fast or anything, but you know, and on YouTube I never really did that well in terms of the videos I made, although I'm pretty proud of some of them. And yeah, I think and then it got into like I started to have aspirations towards competing as Red Bull competition started to do, but I was very aware that I'm not like a guy that can be I'm not like a flip guy, just due to my background and stuff, and my particular build, I guess, as well, going along with what I was doing at the time. So I was just waiting for speed competitions to pop up, and then for them to be open as well, because there was this initial issue with competitions is that they were invite only, and I was like, well, how the hell am I ever gonna make a name for myself in the sport if I can't compete? Because like I'm not like one of these guys that wants to create groundbreaking videos or anything. I want to express myself through art, which I think I have been successful in doing with a few videos, but they've not been for views. They've been for me, really. Like they've been for to create something. But yeah, and that all just led into this sort of path that I've been on now, where I'm still very slowly progressing. Obviously, I'm getting older and I'm getting slower and more injury. I'm more at risk for injury, but I'm stronger than I've ever been, and I'm more technically proficient than I've ever been, and more accurate than I've ever been, and I'm more well-rounded than I've ever been. So, and I'm more conscious and aware of myself and of the sport and its different facets. And yeah, I feel like my particular personality, especially when I was in my 20s, like I was probably not very easy person to be around in my early 20s, because I was very certain that I knew what was going on. I was very certain, like, I know everything now. I was very confident in myself, but I had the blinkers on to so many things. Like I really, like for example, just not training rails until fucking I was 23. Like, come on. But then I think as well, being in the Southwest, being in Bristol, that community, although it was a big community, there's a video online, Bristol Movement 2012, I think, and there were like 8 different teams in the city, and there were tons of kids doing the sport. Unfortunately, that's all fallen off, and there's no community there anymore. But yeah, like it was although it was huge, it was very distant from the rest of the country. So you didn't really, like, we had people like Callum and Sasha come and visit, and we had people like Pip and Kai, who earlier than them used to come to Bristol, but we didn't really have the connection with the rest of the country, and we certainly didn't have the benefit of the sort of improvement of, I don't know, technique and accuracy and things. And I think as a leader of that community, which I was at the time, like I didn't do what I could have done more homework. I could have done more to give myself that knowledge. And yeah, for the future now, I'm not really sure where I'm going with it, if I'm honest, because I feel like I had these aspirations, first of all, to be a professional sort of free runner and to be famous and trying to make my money. Like in 2012, I was going to auditions and I was performing. I performed in like when the Olympics were happening. I did a bunch of like stage performances and stuff, and that was great. But it didn't lead anywhere, you know what I mean? Like there was a kind of a plateau that I hit, and then I wasn't able to earn any more money. So that kind of went on the back burner, and then I was trying to become like a competition athlete, and I think I did as well as I could have done in that route. And now I'm just interested in continuing to progress, continuing to push myself, and then also find a way to provide the service that I want to provide to other people by, improving their strength, improving their speed, improving their conditioning, making them less prone to injury and that sort of thing. But I'm sort of at a point at the moment where I'm not very sure about, and this is a bit of an existential issue for me, is of quite extreme moods. Like I can be very motivated sometimes and very depressed other times, and if I don't have a clear goal that I'm going after, then it can get pretty dark. So yeah, it's a dangerous time. It's a risky time in terms of my lack of particular direction. but I'm just keeping things ticking over. I'm just keeping trying to progress, and I have a really great relationship with my partner. So we're that's going great. My professional career, yeah, like in terms of money and shit, like I want that to improve. But yeah, no particular like specific things. I'm sort of in a transitional period, I would say, at the moment. Transitional stage.
Yeah, man. That's all. Wow. Yeah, that's a nice insight, man. And I find it interesting to hear from you talk about those different aspects of your life, because you in some ways represent my life a bit further on. You know, like I'm 26 now, and I'm thinking more about my sense of longevity with doing this thing, and also about how I find value in training and how I find value with the mission. You know, like spreading parkour and helping people get better. And yeah, so yeah, well, I guess as well, it's interesting you mentioned your kind of existential feelings, because there seems to be, I think we could do a whole talk on this, but there seems to be some, I would say, concerns with mental health aspects of parkour practitioners, just generally. I won't name names specifically, but there are a few practitioners who I see that, you know, I only see what they post, but it does concern me.
Yeah, absolutely. I there's a few people I see, and I'm concerned with if you see like an immediate change in someone's demeanor, or the way they're posting becomes more and more extreme. It's and the fact that we're engaged, and a lot of people at the higher levels are engaged in, risk management with the the consequences of getting that wrong is death. Like those people, yeah, man, it's a concerning thing to see, for sure.
I think that, I mean, yeah, it'd be great to talk again on this sort of issue, and it's something that I've kind of touched base a little bit on with Giles. He seems to be quite interested in this kind of pursuit, but yeah, I think for me, what this also links with is a sense of saturation. And there's a lot of debates about whether Instagram versus YouTube, this whole argument, and about what we value as content and what we gain value from in sharing. And I feel like, to an extent, there's a wave of saturation that actually is inevitable, and that we'll have to adapt to. I don't know whether you've read much. Have you read much of like *Sapiens* or *Homo Deus*, or have you heard of Yuval Harari?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, okay.
No.
There's some really good books by a guy called an Israeli guy called Yuval Harari, and some of the most, like, kind of, I guess you could say, eye-opening books I've read in like recent years. And one of the things he talks about is about this idea of irrelevance, and how as a society we might well get to a point within this century where there is not just a middle, upper and lower class, but actually an irrelevant class, and people because of automation, and because of people losing their jobs in certain ways, because of things becoming more efficient, we actually lose a sense of relevance, and saturation becomes reality. The internet seems like a ever growing snowball of saturation, and I think that this is something that we're going to have to definitely deal with parkour, because back 10 years ago, I could name the 10 top athletes, really. I mean, and before that, you'd have an even better idea of what the community was like. But now, we are things aren't as things have been done. Things are rail flow is not as not as special anymore, you know, like I mean that's a bad example, but you get what I mean.
I understand. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, so yeah, I guess I mean we're closing in on an hour, so we'll kind of maybe save that for another time. But yeah, I guess
No,
it's
it's,
go on. Sorry.
It's an interesting question, and I think it does definitely ties in with like feelings of self-worth, feelings of what you're doing at any specific point mattering, and how that ties in with like real existential questions about your life and the meaning behind what you're doing. It's a very important question to ask. I feel. And what I would say as well is that the problems within the community, and this is the thing that I have to stress, because I see people making these calls for things within the community, like changes in how people behave socially, or changes in how people are putting their content out and things like that. But they fail to recognize the fact that any sort of toxic, or however you want to label it, any sort of part of our particular culture, our particular community, our particular sport, is only a reflection of the deeper issues that are at play in society at large. So when you try to tackle things from the perspective of within our sport there are these issues, and there are specific issues that are separate, of course, from the rest of society, but a lot of them, from my perspective, in understanding in a very cursory way, understanding developmental psychology and understanding the some of the reasons behind the behaviors of people, and also with my particular political perspective, I see that as like, well, look, you're hacking at the branches when there's all these roots underneath that we need to be looking at. So it's an important question, but it reaches far beyond the limits of our particular little space.
Okay, well, I think I would love to talk further. I know you're a busy man, so I don't want to keep you for any longer. So yeah, thank you so much, Tom. That was really insightful, and I'm definitely going to replay and rewatch and kind of process a lot of things you said. Thank you for doing what you do. I think that without you knowing, you probably helped more people than you realize. So I appreciate that a lot. And yeah, more power to you, man. I hope that we can actually train together sometime.
Yeah, that'd be good, man.
I know we're opposite ends of the country, but sometimes, well, hopefully something can happen. But yeah, I hope that the rest of isolation goes well for you, and the police don't get you too upset.
Boy, yeah, let's not go into that.
So yeah, thank you so much, man. And yeah, I will see you hopefully another time. And thank you guys for listening or watching. See you on the next one.